Hello guys, and welcome to Trade Tycoon Tanks. Big thanks to Microprose for sponsoring this video. Today we're going to be taking a first look at this game. It is an extremely complex game with a lot of depth, so I'm excited to show this off to you guys. It's a game that I've really wanted to look at for a while now, to be honest. So let's jump into a new game. I'll just read to you guys the description on the right hand side here. Britain was the first country to invent the tank, and since then was among the leaders in tank design. After the clanking rhomboids proved the importance of the tanks in the First World War, the UK went on several innovative ideas in tank design. Just after the First World War, Britain came to the conclusion that the best counter to a tank was another tank and started to arm its vehicles with dedicated anti-tank guns. It was the first country to do so in the shape of the Vickers No. 2 tank. In the interwar period, Britain was behind the idea of the tankette, a concept deeply attractive to most of the cash-strapped governments around the world. In the mid-1920s, Britain experimented with a doctrine based around using the tank's mobility to fight somewhere other than the enemy's strongpoints. For that, she developed a series of medium tanks that had a combination of firepower and mobility. This idea was further refined into the infantry and cruiser tank concept that lasted a few short years before the British started moving backwards towards medium tanks, this time with added protection. However, the move was interrupted by the Second World War. During the war, Britain created multiple heavily armoured infantry tanks such as the Matilda or Churchill. Equally, from about the midpoint in the war, Britain began to think about the universal tank concept, which today we call the main battle tank. From after the war, Britain tended to build very survivable, good cross-country mobility and effective anti-tank guns. So there we go, we have our difficulty modifiers at the bottom. For the sake of this video, I'm just going to set it to the lowest difficulty so that we have a bit more flexibility with what we can do. And we're going to jump on in. Also, I will say that it is a very good idea to kind of ease yourself into this game. There is a lot of information very, very quickly that you're going to have to pick up. So, I mean, I guess it's kind of the same with a lot of Tycoon games, but this one is extremely, extremely in-depth. There's a lot of things you can look at. Let's call our company name VulcanHD Tanks. There we go. Perfect. Alright, we have our first world news. Tank Corps formed. Acknowledging the importance of tanks, the High Command has decided to separate all future tank regiments from the Machine Gun Corps and assign them to a dedicated military branch with the official name of Tank Corps. Currently there is one tank regiment under formation, and you can expect a new tank contract to be announced soon. So just as an overview of how this game works, basically you research tanks, then you sort of engineer the parts that you've researched, and then you can use those parts to design new tanks. Then you produce the tank, and then you sell the tank by bidding for contracts using your tank designs. It's a really, really cool system, and that's pretty much the gameplay loop in a nutshell. But there is so much more to it than that. Like the way you design your tank, the way you build it, who you get the parts from, who you sell to, how you bid, like how you do your proving ground and such so that you get a high rating for your tank in order to sell it on, the way you manage your workers, and all this kind of stuff comes into effect. And that might seem all very overwhelming now, but I'll just start from scratch. So first things first, let's have an idea of what we're looking at. So this UI, in the top left you have your current cash, and if you hover over it, it will give you a rundown of what's costing you money. Then we have the stored materials, so all of the materials available for building your tanks and such. Then we have the amount of stored tanks, so the amount of tanks you built. You can increase your storage size so that you can hold a bunch of tanks and then sell them all to contracts when they come through. And then you have your workers in the top right, and hovering over those you can see which ones are idle, which ones are at work, and so on. Then we have the achievements, so what we've done so far in the game. Then we have the news, which is going to come, well, basically this comes along as you continue through the dates, and it will basically change depending on what happens in the world. World War I doesn't technically happen in this game. it can happen, but it doesn't always happen, because the world is actually completely automated and procedurally generated almost. Like it's, I'll get to that in a moment. And we have our contract center. When we get offered contracts, this is where they'll turn up. Then we have our management for people we can employ. Then there's the campaign center, which shows the active military campaigns, and that's very useful for determining what kind of tanks you might want to make. Then you have the factory ground button, which is what you can see right now. Then we have the global map, and this is where the scale of this game becomes quite apparent. By clicking on each of these different nations, you can see who they are trading with, who they have non-aggression pacts with, and who they are allied with. And this will basically determine who goes to war with who. You have absolutely no control over what any of the countries do in this game. You don't have any control over their economy, over like the army or tank corps they use, any of that sort of stuff. All you really need to do with this information is kind of determine what kind of tanks they might need, or if they need tanks at all, or how many tanks they might need, and so on and so forth. So we can see here it does give us a nice sort of overall description of the country. So the British Empire is a lucrative customer, the first adopter of tanks in its army ranks. Britain is willing to experiment with various designs and doctrines and is ready to pay in full for it. Do not be fooled. Britain is a demanding customer. Your tanks will be tested in various military campaigns that Britain is waging all over the world, and your company will be measured by multiple requests and tasks. Now, when you do sell people tanks, they will take them into battle, and you do get reports on how well your tanks have done, and based on that, it will affect your reputation moving forwards, which is also another thing you're going to have to pay attention to. Moving on to the next button on the top left here, we have the administration. This is where you can hire new people who can oversee your facilities. You can also hire new workers and engineers if you need more people to work for you. Then we have the research tab, which is very in-depth. This is just tier 1. And we have structure for firepower and mobility. So there is structure, which is all of your hulls and how you make hulls, so riveted assembly, bolted assembly, the different types of steel and iron, and so on. In the firepower, different machine guns, different main guns, different ammo. And then in mobility, it's all about the tracks, your engines, your fuel, that kind of thing. And then as we move on to tier 2, that's when we get into like more like modern, well, I say modern tanks, you know, we move forward in time and we get access to better designs, basically, that we can research and put together really cool tanks. Then we have engineering. This is where we can design our hulls for our tanks. So in this case, we have the Mark 1 tank hull that is sort of preset for us. But if we want, we can, you know, take parts off this. So for example, we could take off the roof and the tail wheel, and we can assign some engineers to research this, or engineer it, I suppose, in order to create a new hull design. And then we can also do reverse engineering, which is where we take someone else's tank that they have designed and reverse engineer it in order to kind of see what parts they use and so on. Then we have the design, which is where we take a hull that we have and then we add to it the rest of the pieces. So in this case, we can add ourselves an engine. And if we click here on the left here, we can see that we have the Daimler Knight engine. That's going to add the engine into the tank. Then we can click the tracks, and we can see that we only have the Centipede Mark 1 right now. So that's going to add those tracks. Then with those tracks, you can see it's added some extra slots here. And we can add a sponson, or we could just, you know, plate up the side of it if we wanted to. But a sponson will then add another gun slot, and in that gun slot, we can potentially put a big gun, or again we can just seal it off. The benefit of having the extra sponson will show up on the right hand side here. And basically, depending on what parts you are taking on and off your tank, all of these things on the right hand side will change. And basically, all of these different sort of modifiers are what will determine whether or not you win or lose a contract. So you do need to kind of pay attention to each of these as you are creating tanks. You can either like wait for a contract to come along and then design a tank specifically for that contract, but that might be a bit tight on time. Or you can maybe have some tanks pre-made that you can then kind of bid for that contract regardless, and then ask them for a little less money because you're not quite hitting their specifications. Anyway, in this case, let's just like throw some armor plate on it, maybe like a sponson on one side, just for the sake of it. We can pop a machine gun in the front here, or we could seal it up potentially, and that's all good. And there you go. That's going to be like a tank that is designed and fully put together. And again, you can assign on the bottom right here, click this button, it will assign as many engineers as you need in order to design this. And then you move on to production. And in production, when you save a design and you've used your engineers to create one, you can click it here, and then you can assign your workers to build a certain number of them, and that will start to use up the resources in the top left. And then we have our resource warehouse. So this is where all of our resources are. And we can order new resources from different areas. So when you have tanks that you have designed, they'll show up on the left here. And what will happen is you can select that tank, and then on the right you can, I think it's at the bottom here, it will show up on the tank designs. You can select a particular area in order to order parts and I guess materials from particular regions. So in this case, Oceania, Europe, Asia, Middle East, Africa, North America. And based on where you bring it from, there is sort of upsides and downsides. So obviously cost is varied. Africa is generally the cheapest, but you can also see that the reliability of their deliveries is low. And what that does, it can potentially increase the time it takes for those resources to arrive quite substantially. And when you're kind of in a position where you're creating a specific tank for a specific contract, you might not have that time to spare. So then you might go and bring it in from Europe, where the reliability is high and the potential delay would only be 2 days. So there's a lot to think through here in regards to that as well. Then we have tank storage. So this is where we would keep our tanks, and also this is where we send our tanks to our contract, the people who are requiring the contract. So we can choose different delivery methods, again based on how fast they are. They might cost more if they are very quick, and also it depends on how safe they are. And safety is just, again, reliability. So if it's a low safety, it basically means there's a chance that it might take longer for your tanks to get to a particular place. But if you have time to spare, then it may be worth paying less with low reliability, and you might not have to worry anyway, because with the extra delay, it's not going to go over the time limit anyway. Then we have the proving grounds. This is where we can like trial any particular tanks that we have put together, and based on how they do, you then have to go back to the research or the design phase, sorry, and you can fix up those design faults in order to get yourself a higher approval rating for contracts. There's also test drive. I'm not really sure if this actually has much sort of effect on how your tanks do. I think it can potentially increase your approval rating, but regardless, that is a very brief first look at this game. There is a lot to go through here, but that pretty much goes through all of the buildings, and it gives you a general sense of the method in which you will produce and sell tanks. So one thing I kind of missed out when I was explaining it initially was how it goes really from the design bureau into production hall. You create a prototype, then you take it to the proving grounds, check if it's got design faults. If it does have design faults, you take it back to the design bureau, fix up the problems with it, then take it back into production hall, pop it out into the warehouse, and then you sell it. Yeah. Anyway, it can get extremely complex, but it is a really compelling tycoon game. There's also things to click on when you're actually in this view. You can click on the buildings individually. You can create facilities, ones in particular, for example, for the administration building that are important. I like the firefighter one. This is you're told to build in the tutorial. There's also ones like this which are very useful as well, which will reduce the risk of accidents for your workers, which means you can remain more efficient for longer. What tends to happen is when you have accidents in your factory, I think people can die, but generally they just get hurt and then they recover over time and then they're available to use again. But in the short term, it can really affect the amount of production you get out. So making sure you don't have those delays is quite important, and that's why a medical station would be important in this case. You can add administrators to each of these different buildings, which give you bonuses. You can also take loans in the administration building here. You can also see that we have assembly lines. In this case, this would just be like selecting a tank to build. Over here we have design lines. This would be selecting a design to research and so on, because you can kind of queue up a bunch of different designs, and then from the main overview you can just select them and make sure the design bureau just does the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one, so you have lots of designs ready to go for the needs of your suppliers, or for the people who are giving you contracts, sorry. Yeah, anyway, I think I'm gonna end it there for today. Next time around, what we're gonna do is kind of do a getting started, where we sort of follow through the tutorial and we really get a much more deeper dive into the mechanics of this game. But hopefully that kind of gives you guys sort of an overview of what to expect going in and how the game really works and what the game flow is like. And yeah, there's a lot more to look forward to, so definitely make sure to come back for the next video, and we can really put together a nice tank and give it a test drive. We can sell it off to our first contract. Should be good fun. That's it for now though. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.